Hello history buffs and welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to be covering the last episode of season 1 of Wolf Hall. So without further ado, let's get into episode 6, Master of Phantoms. We then see Cromwell staring at a tapestry on the wall. It's not the Sheba one, but a different one, where the Queen has her hands clasped together. This is the tapestry that Jane Boleyn referenced earlier in the episode, and made a comparison to the Queen in the tapestry and Anne begging with Henry Norris. The tapestry in question is called Esther and Ahasuerus. It, along with 2 other tapestries, including the Sheba one, were replicated by Zadi and Zadi for the show. However, some alterations were made to suit the show better. Quote, "The project took full advantage of 21st century technologies as it digitally manipulated the tapestry of Esther and Ahasuerus to meet the requirements of the artistic director. The tapestry plays a prominent part during a scene with Anne Boleyn and King Henry VIII. The frame shows Anne Boleyn holding her hands in a clasped position. The tapestry was edited to portray Esther holding her hands in the same clasp, as well as editing her hair and eye colourings to match those of Anne Boleyn's. It is also significant that it is this tapestry that has become the centre point of this episode. According to the National Trust Collections website, quote, "The story of Esther is told in the Old Testament book of Esther. King Ahasuerus chose Esther as his queen after his original wife Vashti disobeyed him. Esther was originally presented to the king by her kinsman Mordecai, but she kept her Jewish parentage a secret. When the king's chamberlain, Haman, began to grow proud and demand homage from everyone in the court, Mordecai refused to bow down before him. This provoked great anger in Haman, and he sent out the orders in the name of the king for all the Jews in the kingdom to be slaughtered and their goods taken on an appointed day. Mordecai heard of this and told Esther that it was her duty to go to the king and ask for mercy for her people. Esther replied that Ahasuerus had a rule that anyone who presented themselves to him unbidden would be executed, unless he touched them with his golden scepter. Nonetheless, she resolved to risk death to plead for the Jews to be spared. The tapestry shows Esther presenting herself to Ahasuerus, who extended his golden scepter to her and asked her to present her petition. He granted her petition and elevated Mordecai to a high rank, because earlier Mordecai had told him of a plot on his life. In this scenario, Henry is King Ahasuerus, and Anne Boleyn is Esther, the dutiful queen who replaced his previous disobedient queen, Catherine of Aragon. She was disobedient because she didn't provide a living male heir. Anne, or Esther, is presenting herself in front of the king, hoping to receive the golden scepter. However, whereas Esther is spared execution, Anne, unfortunately, is not. We then cut to a wallowing Henry, who is basically trying to convince himself that Anne was a vile woman and that what he's about to do is justified because she never loved him in the first place, and that Anne was just an adulterous whore the entire time. We then have a flashback to earlier in the series when Cromwell had to watch the mask about his dear mentor Wolsey, and now how the men and women who laughed at his silent suffering are now having their own downfall. It's rather twisted and poetic. It also matches this theme that's been running throughout the series of Cromwell getting his own back on those who wronged him. And we can see this when he interrogates the 5 men accused of sleeping with Anne. This is even addressed during Norris's interrogation. It's then backed by Cromwell himself when he says, "I needed guilty men, Henry, and I have found men who are guilty, though not necessarily as charged," confirming that Cromwell knows these men to be innocent, but he is setting them up to get revenge on how they participated in the cruel play about Thomas Wolsey. Cromwell name drops Sir Francis Bryan, a relative of the Boleyns who previously appeared in the series in the mass Boleyn group shot, who, like her uncle Norfolk, has now turned on the Boleyns. Francis Weston is the last one to be shown, and he knows his fate, and Cromwell actually shows a bit of sympathy for the man who thought he had another 20 years. It's then Anne's turn. We are met by Sir William Kingston, the Constable of the Tower of London, who, like in real life, has been charged with informing Cromwell of everything that Anne says. He also informs us that his wife and Anne's aunt, Lady Shelton, is with her, which is all historically accurate. Kingston then says two things that we associate with Anne and her time in the Tower. One, that she sometimes laughs and sometimes cries. And two, that when she was informed that she was to be in her rooms that she stayed for her coronation, that she said, "It is too good for me." I do enjoy touches like this, but going back to my point earlier, this is when the lines between fiction and non-fiction blur, so it really is worth knowing your history before consuming fictitious media, so you can better appreciate the art that has been created and not get swept up with myths and inaccuracies. Anne then says that she wants her own ladies, because Kingston's wife is a spy, and her aunt has a grudge against her. The fact that Anne was surrounded by, shall we say, unsympathetic women is true, and that she was not permitted to have her own ladies. Anne then asks if all of this is a test by Henry, something that I believe Anne may have truly felt at the time, as she allegedly kept looking round for a messenger even when she went to the scaffold, as if this was a test and the whole thing was just going to be stopped, just to let her know that she had passed. Unfortunately, as we know, that relief was never to come. Cromwell then advises Anne to be remorseful for Elizabeth's sake, which is what Anne does in her scaffold speech. I also find it interesting that the show never actually tells us whether they think Anne is guilty or not. We see through the likes of her aunt, Lady Shelton, that she is guilty, and Cromwell suggests as such when he says about her ladies being in fear to cover her tracks, but now they feel emboldened. We also have Anne being outraged at the accusation and saying that there is no proof, but she never actually denies the fact, which I actually think is quite clever how they skirt around this topic, always leaving an element of doubt. We can strongly assume that Anne and George never got intimate. However, as none of us were there and that there's no definitive proof that they didn't, there will always be that little bit of mist around the question of incest. But I'm like 99.9% sure they didn't. Anne then throws out another one-liner that is often attributed to her, where she clutches her neck and says, "I have a little neck." We then cut to Anne's trial. She is wearing a red and gold gown, like the sources say she did on the day of her arrest. And this, I believe, is Anne trying to portray the regality of her position as queen, to remind those judging her that she is still the true Queen of England, and to hark back to when her and Henry used to wear the colour together when they were a happy team. What I think is a nice detail is that Anne is allowed to sit on a chair, whereas her brother George has to stand. This is because, and this is historically accurate at this point, Anne at this point in time is still Queen of England, so she's allowed to sit. Anne and George defend themselves well, like their historical counterparts. Anne is calm and firm, while George is cocky right up until he makes a cock up. See what I did there? He read aloud words that he allegedly said, and while he's laughing, you can see he realises his mistake. Trying to reassure that he does not own those words, Cromwell then informs him, "You do now," pretty much giving George his own rope. Anne is then charged by her own uncle to be burnt at the stake. The wording in the script is lifted straight out of the records of Anne's trial.
Thou shalt be burned here within the tower, or else to have thy head smitten off, as the king's pleasure. Head smitten off, as the king's pleasure shall be further known.
Interestingly, the Duke of Norfolk gets defensive when he's accused of doing it wrong.
What are you talking about? These fellows say I've done it wrong. They say I have to say burn only.
The phrasing is the king's, and don't tell me what we can or can't do. We never tried a queen before.
And Cromwell remarks, "Don't tell me what to do, we've never tried a queen before," which is also true. Anne is the first, and to my knowledge, the only Queen of England to have ever gone through a trial like this. And therefore, they didn't specify how she was to die. The Queen of England had never been executed before, and the charges that Anne was found guilty of would normally mean being burnt. We then see Sir Francis Bryan, Cromwell, and his son Gregory in the crowd awaiting Anne's execution. Both Cromwells did attend. We then see Anne coming down the steps towards the scaffold. Let's talk about Anne's outfit, shall we? It's not a bad representation of what she wore to the scaffold, but it could be better. An eyewitness account said, quote, "She was dressed in a gown of black damask, with a short mantle furred with ermines, with a red petticoat underneath the gown, and an English gable hood on her head." Now let's look at what Claire Foy is wearing. We do have a dark gown. I'm not going to be too nitpicky, as some accounts have said it was grey, and it's closer to the grey than the black, so we can let that slide. We do also have a cape with ermines, and then we have the headdress. Well, the headdress for what they call a French hood has been questionable all season, so let's ignore the quality, but it should be a gable hood, not a French one. And I can't see a red petticoat, but overall a good attempt by the BBC. As she approaches the scaffold, we can see that Anne is frantically looking around, something that Gregory comments on, to which Cromwell responds, "Because she still thinks there's hope." We know from eyewitness accounts that she was looking or hoping for someone to call the whole thing off, as if it was a test from Henry. I think Tracy Borman put it best in her documentary that looked at Anne's last days. Quote, "Even now, as time is running out, Anne is looking all around her, as if hoping to see a messenger from the king carrying a royal pardon. But there is no messenger." Again, Wolf Hall has taken the script from history. They have used Edward Hall's account of her speech.
"Good Christian people, I am come hither to die, for according to the law, and by the law, I am judged to die.
Yeah, I can't hear her.
And therefore I will speak.
You think she'd speak up for her last words?
I am come hither to accuse no man, nor to speak anything of that whereof I am accused and condemned to die. But I pray God save the king, and send him long to reign over you. For gentler, nor more merciful prince was there never. And to me was he ever a good, a gentle, and a sovereign lord. And if any person will meddle of my cause, I require them to judge best. And thus I take my leave of the world, and of you all. And I heartily desire you all to pray for me. Lord, have mercy on my soul. To God I commend my soul."
Just like in real life, Anne didn't have a block. She knelt to keep her dignity, and again, keeping true to history, once she's knelt and blindfolded, Anne kept repeating, "Jesu, receive my soul. O Lord God, have pity on my soul." Another bit that was kept true was obviously the fact that she was executed by sword, not axe, and that the executioner took off his shoes so Anne couldn't hear him. We also see Anne trying to tuck in some hair into her linen cap, which she apparently did in some accounts, and that he swung the sword in the air above his head to gain momentum. It, however, would have been his apprentice that would have made the noise to distract Anne, and just like that, she is dispatched in one blow. Her four ladies then rush to collect the body, weeping, not wanting any man to touch her, and her body is put in an arrow chest. An interesting decision not to have her lips quivering, but I ultimately feel like that was the best choice. We then finish the episode with Cromwell visiting King Henry VIII, who is elated, jubilant in fact, and we can only assume this is down to Anne's execution. And that, ladies and gents, is all of the Easter eggs and little references I found in Wolf Hall Season 1, Episode 6. If I missed anything, please let me know in the comments down below. And with that, we have also finally finished Season 1 of Wolf Hall. I do apologise, I know it's been a bit of a long slog. I will be doing Season 2, don't worry, but I am going to be taking a break before tackling that. But I will also be filling in with a few more what ifs and stuff like that in the meantime, so please stay tuned for that. But anyway guys, that's it from me, and if you enjoyed this video, then make sure to give a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I will see you next time. Bye!